Hi, and welcome back to GCSE History lessons. In this lesson, we will look at how the USA and USSR viewed each other at the beginning of the post-war era. We will do this by looking at two telegrams sent home by each country's ambassador to the other. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain how the USA viewed the USSR in the early post-war era, and explain how the USSR saw the USA at the same time. You will remember from previous lessons that the USSR was a communist one-party state. This means that the Communist Party controlled the economy and owned all land and businesses of the country, and people had less freedoms. Meanwhile, the USA was a capitalist democracy, meaning it had less control over the national economy or politics, and allowed individuals to make their own businesses or vote for the political ideas they liked the best. You will also remember that despite being allies during World War II, at the end of the war, the relationship between the USA and USSR had been damaged by the creation and use of atomic weapons, the establishment of Soviet satellite states in Eastern Europe, the relationship between Truman and Stalin, and the breakdown of talks at Potsdam. On February 22, 1946, the US ambassador to Moscow, George Kennan, sent an 8,000-word telegram to Washington describing in detail the USSR's structure, strategies, and possible weaknesses. With the average length of a telegram in the UK in 1950 being about 15 words, Kennan's 8,000-word telegram to Washington became known as the Long Telegram. He suggested that the Soviet Union was heavily armed and feared the outside world, but that it did not want to conquer the world quickly. He stated that the leaders of the USSR also believed that the capitalist countries would fight between themselves to gain money, and that the USSR could benefit from these conflicts between capitalist countries. He also stated that the propaganda machine of the USSR government was strong, and that the citizens of the USSR only receive strictly censored information about the outside world. It has an elaborate and far-flung apparatus for the exertion of its influence in other countries. An apparatus of amazing flexibility and versatility, managed by people whose experience and skill in underground methods are presumably without parallel in history, he said. He warned the US government that the problem of how to cope with this force is undoubtedly the greatest task our diplomacy has ever had to face, and probably the greatest it will ever have to face. Kennan explained that the USSR was strong and intended to expand its influence, but that Soviet power does not work by fixed plans. It does not take unnecessary risks. It is highly sensitive to the logic of force. For this reason, it can easily withdraw, and usually does when strong resistance is encountered at any point. Kennan also said that Stalin's internal policy is devoted to increasing in every way the strength and prestige of the Soviet state. Intensive military industrialization, the maximum development of armed forces, great displays to impress outsiders, and continued secretiveness about internal matters designed to conceal weaknesses and to keep opponents in the dark. But despite the USSR's patience, strength, and flexibility, Kennan also unveiled what he believed to be the USSR's main weaknesses. He wrote that, gauged against the Western world as a whole, the Soviets are still by far the weaker force, and that the success of the Soviet system is not yet finally proven. It has yet to be demonstrated that it can survive the supreme test of successive transfer of power from one individual or group to another. He suggested that the US should show its willingness to use force at any point where the USSR seemed to be expanding, and that in this way the USA could contain the USSR. Nikolai Novikov, the USSR ambassador to Washington, sent a similar telegram back to Moscow on September 27, 1946. Novikov explained that the United States wished to infiltrate the economies of Europe and the world with its capitalist-style economy. This was seen as aggressive and threatening. Novikov relayed to Moscow that it was the duty of the USSR to resist and save the world from American domination. He stated that, along with economic threats, the increase in military potential in peacetime and the establishment of American bases 10,000 to 12,000 kilometers from the territory of the United States and are on the other side of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans clearly indicates the offensive nature of the US Army and Navy. Finally, Novikov also described President Truman as a politically unstable person. So, to summarize what we've learned today, US Ambassador to the USSR, George Kennan, sent a telegram to the US on February 22, 1946. Kennan explained that the USSR was armed and dangerous. Its propaganda was strong and its people did not have an accurate picture of the outside world. The USSR was flexible and patient in its expansion. It would not risk open warfare. The USA should show readiness to use force against the USSR in order to contain the spread of its influence. Soviet ambassador to the USA, Nikolai Novikov, sent a telegram to the USSR on September 27, 1946. In this telegram, he explained the USA was aggressively trying to infiltrate the economies of Europe and the world, and that Truman was an unstable and unreliable leader. Next lesson, we will review what we have covered in this series so far. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on GCSE History Lessons.